You know, the global economy right now, it feels less like careful chess and more like, well, a high-stakes game of dominoes, doesn't it?
It really does. Every big move seems to trigger something else down the line, often unexpectedly.
Exactly. Have you ever wondered why these really aggressive sanctions, ones meant to punish just one country, could end up completely changing how huge industrial nations operate?
Or even force countries to seriously rethink using the dollar, the world's reserve currency.
Right. We're looking at a period where these foreign policy tools maybe aren't working as intended. They seem to be causing this massive blowback.
Yes, some analysts are even calling it a kind of policy suicide weapon in some cases.
Before we dive deeper, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and support Geo9.
So that's really our focus today. We're looking at the sources on this, and they highlight these huge effects hitting three main areas, all connected.
Okay, what are they?
First, Germany's industrial stability. Second, China's whole financial strategy, a big pivot there. And third, surprisingly, it loops right back to American farmers.
Wow, okay, so quite a chain reaction.
Absolutely. So the goal here is to really unpack these consequences. We want to get past the headlines and understand the real costs, economic, political, the whole system, really.
Costs of what some are calling ego politics, right?
Yeah.
Making foreign policy based on maybe immediate leverage or political wins.
That's the term being used, yeah. And figuring out who's actually paying the price for all this new tension.
Okay, let's get into it and maybe start with the most ironic part, the collateral damage hitting Germany.
Yeah, the powerhouse of Europe.
Yeah.
Facing potential shutdowns now because of sanctions they agreed to against Russia a couple of years back.
It sounds almost unbelievable. The idea was to hurt Moscow's energy money, right? But instead, Berlin's feeling the heat.
Well, yeah, the global financial system is complicated. The prime example is this huge Rosneft refinery in northeast Germany.
Rosneft. Okay. How significant is that one?
It handles over 12% of Germany's entire refining capacity. It's massive.
Yeah.
And sources say it's facing a potential total shutdown.
12% from one plant? Why is it so vulnerable now? What's the link to the sanctions?
Okay, so this gets a bit technical, but it really shows U.S. financial leverage. Germany took over administrative control of the refinery back in 2022. Sort of nationalized it, really, to keep the energy flowing.
Right, that makes sense. Secure the supply.
But that ownership, on paper, still 50% Russian. And that little detail is crucial under U.S. rules.
Okay, so even though Germany runs it.
Exactly. The U.S. regulations basically say if you're dealing with entities that have significant Russian ties, you risk getting cut off from the dollar system. Think asset freezes, banks refusing to deal with you, SWIFT access, gone.
So seizing control wasn't enough to get around the U.S. sanctions because the underlying ownership was still Russian.
Precisely. It was murky enough to trigger those U.S. regulatory concerns. It put Germany in a really, really awkward spot.
And this is where it gets, well, kind of humiliating, isn't it? Germany, a major power, had to basically ask Washington for permission.
That's what the reports suggest. German officials apparently writing directly to the U.S. Treasury, pleading for a special license, an exception, just to keep their own critical refinery running.
Just to keep the lights on, essentially.
Pretty much. And it really highlights who calls the shots in global finance right now. What's really telling is the UK had already granted a similar exception for another part of the same German company's operations.
So the rules aren't really fixed rules, they're negotiable.
It seems that way. It depends on your leverage, maybe your relationship with Washington, or perhaps if the U.S. decides your industrial collapse is strategically worse than weakening the sanctions a tiny bit.
It's less about principles and more about power dynamics.
That's certainly how it looks on the ground. And this isn't just abstract fear in Germany. The economic hit is real.
Yeah, you mentioned industrial stability earlier. What are we seeing?
We saw their industrial production drop 4.3% in just 1 month. That's the biggest fall in 3 years.
4.3% in a month. Ouch.
Yeah, it's concrete. The energy crisis made worse because they're scrambling for expensive alternatives like, say, U.S. LNG. It's hitting their core industries hard. Steel, chemicals, cars.
Making them less competitive globally, I imagine.
Absolutely. When your energy costs shoot up and there's this regulatory uncertainty hanging over you, companies either stop producing or they think about moving elsewhere.
In this whole situation, Germany needing this permission slip from Washington, others were watching, right?
Yeah.
Especially rivals.
Oh, definitely. Which brings us to the second domino, China's reaction.
Okay, so while Germany was sort of kneeling, China saw this differently.
You could say that. They looked at the sanctions on Russia and thought, hang on, that could be us next. They saw relying so heavily on the dollar system as a major strategic weak spot.
A vulnerability. So what did they do? Just confirm.
No, they took concrete steps, quite significant ones. They started actively getting out of dollar dependency, primarily by cutting back their holdings of US Treasury bonds. We saw them let about $54 billion worth mature over just 6 months without reinvesting.
$54 billion,
Yeah.
and they didn't buy new ones.
Nope. Plus another $26 billion were let go in Hong Kong. It's a clear pattern,
Yeah.
actively reducing their exposure to the dollar.
Why, though? What's the fear?
Asset seizure. Plain and simple. China holds almost $1 trillion in U.S. debt.
$1 trillion. Wow.
Yeah. And it's all held by American custodians under American law. So from Beijing's point of view, the dollar started looking less like a neutral tool for trade and more like, well, a potential weapon.
Something that could be used against them if things got tense politically.
Exactly. A way to freeze or seize a huge chunk of their national wealth overnight. This is what people mean by forced de-dollarization. It wasn't necessarily their first choice, but the geopolitical climate pushed them.
Okay, so they're selling bonds. What else? Are they building alternatives?
They are. And this is fascinating. At the same time, they dramatically increased their energy ties with Russia.
Buying Russian oil and gas.
Lots of it. In just 1 month, we saw China buy over $5 billion worth of Russian fossil fuels. About $3 billion in crude oil, another $2 billion in gas, coal, LNG.
$5 billion in 1 month. That's a serious commitment.
It is. But here's the really crucial part. How they paid for it.
Not in dollars.
Mostly not. The payments were primarily settled directly in Chinese yuan and Russian rubles.
Ah, so they're building that parallel system.
They're actively piloting it, yes. A way to trade large volumes completely outside of U.S. oversight and potential interference. It's not necessarily about crashing the dollar tomorrow.
More about creating an alternative, an insulated channel.
Exactly. An escape route, you could say,
Yeah.
driven purely by geopolitical necessity. The world is watching this happen in real time.
If you're finding these insights useful, take a second to subscribe to Geo9. It really motivates us to keep sharing more research stories like this.
Okay, so we've seen the ally, Germany, feeling vulnerable, and the rival, China, pushing for independence. Now think about this. The domino effect comes full circle. It hits home.
Back in the U.S. How?
Washington's own citizens end up paying a price. Those very sanctions designed to pressure Moscow ended up hurting American farmers.
American farmers. Explain that connection.
Well, China needed to react, or maybe just diversify its food sources away from a supplier it saw as politically risky, right?
Yeah.
So it significantly cut back, almost stopped buying U.S. soybeans.
Soybeans. That's a huge export crop for the U.S., isn't it?
Massive. This move wiped out roughly $13 billion in annual sales for U.S. farmers. That's about 20% of all U.S. soybean exports. Gone.
$13 billion. Just like that.
Just like that. And you can imagine the immediate impact on the ground.
Yeah, for farmers. What does that mean, practically?
It means silos full of soybeans they can't sell. Ports that handle agricultural exports suddenly quiet. Prices for soybeans drop domestically because there's this glut.
While their debts probably stay the same or even go up.
Exactly. Farm debt becomes harder to manage. It's a direct hit to their livelihoods.
And this traces back to foreign policy decisions, sanctions, tariffs.
Directly. It's what can happen when foreign policy gets conducted almost like impulsive business deals, slapping on tariffs, making threats, imposing broad sanctions quickly without maybe fully mapping out the ripple effects.
The world looked elsewhere for more reliable suppliers, maybe. And U.S. agriculture paid the price for that instability.
That seems to be a big part of it. It really brings the whole thing together, doesn't it?
How so? Synthesize this for us.
Well, think about the amazing efficiency of the U.S. supply chain we always talk about. It relied on a certain level of global predictability, stable relationships.
Trust, almost.
Yeah. But now we see that chain fracturing, these external political moves driven by maybe short-term leverage or retaliation, this ego politics idea. They create these damaging waves that wash back onto the domestic economy.
And it's ordinary people who bear the cost.
Absolutely. Whether it's a factory worker in Germany worried about energy costs or a farmer in Iowa watching prices collapse, the costs of this friction are spread wide.
So, stepping back, what's the big picture here? What does this monumental shift really mean long term?
Well, what we've discussed paints a picture of a major geopolitical realignment. You've got Germany now seemingly dependent on Washington for basic energy security.
Tied to U.S. approval, essentially.
Then you have China actively systematically trying to break free from the dollar system to protect itself financially.
Decoupling, yeah.
And meanwhile, the U.S. agricultural sector takes a direct economic hit as collateral damage from policies made far away.
It feels like more than just an energy crunch or a trade spat.
Oh, it's much bigger.
Yeah.
It feels like a fundamental rewriting of the global rules of power and finance.
Yeah.
And it's happening through these often hostile actions and reactions.
So if this de-dollarization trend continues, what are the really deep implications, especially for the U.S.?
That's the trillion-dollar question, isn't
Yeah.
it? Look, the dollar's special status forces the world to use it for trade, especially big commodities like oil.
Right, the petrodollar system.
Which means there's constant global demand for dollars. And if you need dollars, you often end up buying U.S. Treasury debt. That demand is what helps the U.S. finance its enormous national debt relatively cheaply. It keeps interest rates manageable.
Okay, so the global use of the dollar supports U.S. debt.
Massively.
Yeah.
But if this de-dollarization trend really takes hold, and we're seeing signs, right? Brazil, Saudi Arabia, India, they're starting to settle big trades in their own currencies.
If that becomes normal,
Then that built-in global demand for U.S. debt starts to fade. If the world develops reliable alternatives that are seen as sanction-proof.
the U.S. ability to finance its own spending gets harder, more expensive.
Potentially, yes. The whole structure could start to wobble. It makes understanding these shifts absolutely critical. Knowledge is really the only defense against getting caught in the crossfire of these new economic weapons.
So the world is definitely shifting, moving away from the old order. The question isn't really about who's morally right or wrong anymore, is it?
It feels less relevant sometimes. The really pressing question now, the one maybe to leave everyone thinking about, is this. Who is actually ready for this new reality?
Ready for a world where economic levers, currencies, commodities, supply chains are routinely used as weapons.
Exactly. Even by the nations claiming to uphold global stability, are our institutions, are you prepared to navigate that? Because the costs are real, they're widespread, but the foresight to manage them seems dangerously scarce.
So what's your take on this? Share your point of view in the comments below, and if you haven't already, subscribe to Geo9 so you don't miss future insights.